Okay, we
So was
are
she
on
thrown off the cliff?
thrown off the cliff, not the Sotah, but we will get more of that scene today. Okay, Chesama Beis 8b. If you can see my point here, we are right over here. So the Gemara is continuing its analyzation of the Mishnah, and the Mishnah was describing the process of the Sotah. And yesterday we discussed this idea that they undo her hair and they tear her clothing, revealing her chest. And we discussed the pros and cons of that, comparing it to someone who is going through capital punishment, where there's the obligation under certain circumstances. We discussed the various theory details about whether or not they would also be stripped down. And the next statement was, the Mishnah said, etc. If she was wearing white clothing, they give her black clothing. That's what the Mishnah said. It's part of the process of humiliation, is she changes from white clothing to black clothing. So Tana, we learned in the Mishnaic text that one should not think that white and black are absolute colors, but rather it's relative. If she happened to look better in black clothing, that was her palette, then she should be given other unsightly clothing. So it's interesting that the Mishnah, the Gemara doesn't say that if she looks good in black, give her white. Right? No, it's our Mishnah was, the premise is she looks good in white, and therefore give her black clothing. But if she happens to look good in black, it doesn't say then go give her white. It says to give her unsightly clothing. I wonder what the significance of that is, in terms of not the literal meaning of the Sotah, but in terms of the metaphor of the Sotah as our relationship with Hashem. I wonder what that might mean. I'll tell you where my head is at in terms of thinking about this. I haven't fully developed it. And you can use this model as we go forward in describing what's done with her clothing. This might help. So in Hasidus, clothing, garments, is the symbol of thought, speech, and action. Right? We have, in the way the Tanya, structures or describes the structure of the soul, it describes the internal system of the soul, that is primarily intelligence and emotions. That's the soul itself. The personality of the soul is its intelligence, its understanding, and its emotions. And then the soul has clothing. So the same way clothing are the way in which I present myself, the way in which I package myself to the world quite physically. I'm wearing my clothing. So likewise, there's the way in which the soul, i.e. the emotions and the intelligence, packages itself. And the way it packages itself, or the way it expresses itself, is through one of three means, either through thought, through speech, through action, or all three. First, I think about how I feel, then I might speak about how I feel, and then I might act on how I feel. Or an idea, first I think of the idea, those are the thoughts, and then I might speak about the idea, and then I might act on the idea. Right? So the thought, speech, and action are the garments through which the soul communicates to the world outside, or even communicates to itself. Like in thought, I communicate to myself. Right? Thoughts and ideas aren't the same thing. And the proof is I can have ideas that I'm not thinking about right now, or I can choose to switch from one thought to another. If I have two ideas in my mind, I can start thinking about one and then switch to thinking about the other, even though the idea is still there, right? Because my intelligence doesn't go anywhere, even if I happen to be thinking about silly things, let's say, right? Because thoughts, like clothing, can be changed. Speech, like clothing, can be changed. Actions, like clothing, can be changed. So this is where my head is at in terms of describing what happens with the clothing. So using that model, if I think of the clothing as thought, speech, and action, which, by the way, is primarily where mitzvahs are. Mitzvahs don't exist in the internal system of the soul, in the intelligence and emotion. With the exception of love God and fear God, which are emotional mitzvahs, the vast majority of mitzvahs are in the realm of speech and action, and some of it in thought. Let's say Torah study is in thought. You have to engage your mind to think about Torah study. Pray, but even Torah study is meant to be verbalized when one studies, and it's like reading Torah, or same thing with prayer. Even though it's a thoughtful process, one has to verbalize the words to fulfill the mitzvah. So, like the mess up, for comparing our relationship with Hashem to the Sotah, then us being the woman, our failure would be somewhere in the realm of thought, speech, and action, somewhere in the realm of the clothing of the soul. And maybe there's that connection to the fact that they tear her clothing and what this means, that it's white clothing versus black clothing versus dirty clothing. Anyway, I'm just putting that out there as to where my head is at and trying to understand what the significance of tearing the clothing is in terms of our relationship with Hashem. That's where I'm thinking about. But exactly how that fits in with how the Gemara builds it, I haven't fully developed that yet, but that's where I'm at. So I'm putting it out there. Should someone come up with something? Okay. The Mishnah continues. So after saying that they take off her clothing, or they tear her clothing, and then if she's wearing white clothing, they give her black clothing. Now we learned that if she looks good in black, they give her some other clothing that aren't good looking. The Mishnah continues. Hoya Allah klizav. If she had gold jewelry or any kind of jewelry, etc., the Mishnah says they remove the jewelry. Excuse me. Says the Gemara Pshita. This seems to be an obvious statement that we would take off her jewelry. It seems so obvious that the Mishnah doesn't even have to state it. Why is it obvious? Hashta, considering that now, Nevli Menavala, we are trying to make her look unsightly, or Menaval means literally like repulsive. We're trying to make her look not good, right? We're tearing her clothing, we're taking off the white and putting on the black. So we're trying to make her look not pleasant. Hani mibaye, do I have to tell you that you take off her jewelry? Of course you're taking off her jewelry. We're trying to make her not look good. Says the Gemara, no. So this is the Gemara's question. It seems so obvious that they would take off her jewelry that the Mishnah doesn't even have to state it. Says the Gemara, no, it's not that obvious actually. Because Mao de Taima, I might have thought that Bahani, by keeping her jewelry on, Isla Bizayin Tfei, it's even more embarrassing. Keda Amri Enchi, as people would say, apparently there's an ancient Aramaic expression which goes like this. Shaliach Ertail Nesayim Nesani. I think I'm pronouncing it right. It basically means, there goes the naked man wearing shoes. It's an expression. As if to say, the fact that the person's wearing shoes only highlights their nakedness. If the person was completely stripped down, the person's completely stripped down. But all of a sudden the person's wearing shoes, it looks even more ridiculous. So one might have thought, therefore, that keeping on her jewelry would actually add to her, to the embarrassment. Here she is, we ripped her clothing, we revealed her chest, we changed her clothing into this, from white to black, or from black to something that's unsightly, and she's still wearing jewelry. It's even more mocking. So considering this, one might have thought that actually should leave the jewelry on, because that would add to her embarrassment. Therefore, Kamash Malon, therefore the Mishnah must come and say, no, take her jewelry off. Okay. Again, in the back of my head, I'm thinking about what this might mean in terms of our relationship with Hashem. Maybe by tomorrow we'll come up with something. Okay, and the Mishnah continued in the process of the Sotah. After they tore her clothing, they took off her jewelry. The Mishnah continues, etc. Afterwards, they bring literally the Mishnah says, an Egyptian rope to tie the tear so that her clothes don't completely fall off. So they tear her clothing, reveal her chest, and then they take a rope to tie the tear so that it doesn't completely slip off. So that was the Mishnah. So the Gemara asks, Ba'mine Rabbi Abba presented the following inquiry Rav Huna, from his teacher of Huna, or from Rav Huna. So he asked as follows: Chevel Mitzri. This Egyptian rope, this kind of thick, coarse rope that the Mishnah prescribes to be used to tie the ripped part of her clothing. Mahushi Yaakov B'Sotah. Is this something which Yaakov means it's absolutely vital, meaning to say, if you don't have it, the entire law of the Sotah is undone, right? There are some times where there's elements of a mitzvah which are good to have, but if you don't do them, it's not as if you didn't fulfill the mitzvah. So, trying to think of an example. Okay, let's say matzah on the Seder night, right? So the mitzvah to eat a certain amount of matzah. And by custom, as part of the Seder process, we eat the matzah and mar together in a sandwich. because to remember what Hillel did. So it's a custom, and it's a vital custom. We definitely should do it. But a person who didn't eat that sandwich will have still fulfilled the mitzvah of eating matzah if they actually ate the matzah, right? So sometimes we do things that are additional to the mitzvah that aren't necessarily so crucial to the mitzvah that if you didn't do it, you didn't fulfill the obligation. So the Gemara wants to know, or Rabbi Abba is asking of Rabbi Huna, this Egyptian rope, do you specifically have to have that rope? And if you don't have that Egyptian rope, this thick Egyptian rope, then the Sotah is invalid? Or rather, Mishum Shalosh Matana Bagadal Ma'ala. Or is the reason why we are putting this Egyptian rope is simply so that the clothing doesn't fall off her? And if that's the case, then I could take a small little chain, which isn't any fancy jewelry, because we already said before we're not allowed to have jewelry. And if I can't get a hold of this thick Egyptian rope, use a thin chain. It'll do the job. So if that's the reason, if the reason for this Egyptian rope is simply because we need to hold the clothing from falling off, then even if it's not Egyptian rope, it would also be okay, so long as it does the job and it's not glamorous, just a thin chain. Or perhaps it needs to be specifically Egyptian rope. Why? Because later the Gemara is going to tell us that the reason why we have this chain, and the reason why we have this rope is because she tied herself with a fancy ribbon, meaning to say she made herself look beautiful to attract another man. So therefore, therefore the kohen has to bring a Egyptian rope, which is the exact opposite of glamorous, the kaishala, and he puts it on her, above her chest. And if that's the case, miyakiv, then that would mean that you have to have exactly this rope. So in other words, like this, what's the purpose of this rope? If the purpose of this rope is to put on a rope that is ugly and coarse to counteract the beauty that she put on herself to attract, a beautiful ribbon specifically, because she used to attract men. Now, if that's the point, then it's got to be specifically this ugly, thick Egyptian rope, because that will do the job of counteracting what she did, which was put on this beautiful ribbon to attract men. However, if the reason for the rope is simply that the clothing don't fall off, then it doesn't have to be specifically this kind of rope. It could be anything that does the job. Even, as the Gemara suggested earlier, even just a simple chain. Amar Lei, so Rav Huna responded to Rabbi Abba, Tani Tuha. We have a Mishnaic age text which resolves the issue. Our Mishnah says, after they rip her clothing and they take off her jewelry, they bring a Egyptian rope, the kaisher l'mayla medadaha. This is what our Mishnah says, and they tie it above her chest. And then the Mishnah continues, Kedei, so that shaloi yishmitu b'gadal ma'ala, so that the clothing does not fall off from her. So our Mishnah explicitly states that the reason for the rope is that her clothing don't fall off. And because the Mishnah gave an explicit reason, this resolves the issue. So long as you have a rope or some sort of chain that isn't glamorous, it isn't jewelry, and it's preventing her clothing from falling off, then it does the job. It doesn't have to be specifically the Egyptian rope. This is the Gemara's conversation. It began by not being sure if we need specifically this rope, or it could be anything that holds the clothing up. And the reason why you might think specifically Egyptian rope is because that rope is very thick and coarse, and it counteracts the beauty which she adorned herself with to attract men. And therefore the Mishnah was uncertain, does it have to be specifically this rope, or could it be any chain that holds the clothing up? And the Gemara resolved this by saying, as long as it's some sort of chain, rope, something that holds the clothing from falling down, it does the job. This is the Gemara's discussion. Now, final discussion in the Gemara's analysis before we get to the next Mishnah. So the Mishnah said, the Mishnah said with regard to the Sotah, that anybody who wants to come and see can come and see, come and watch what she's doing. And then the Mishnah goes on to say, and all women should come and see. This is what the Mishnah says. So this redundancy is what the Gemara is going to address now. It begins by saying, anybody who wants to come and look can come and look. And then it goes on to say, all women can come and look. So what's with these two statements? The Gemara asks, in the way the Gemara asks the questions as follows. Hagufakasha. This Mishnah itself is perplexing. Amris. First, the Mishnah said, anybody who wants to observe her, Raya, can come and look. Alma. the implication is, loishna gavri, it doesn't make a difference if it's a man who wants to come and see, but loishna nashi, it doesn't make a difference if a woman wants to see, right? The Mishnah said anybody who wants to see can come and see. That's anybody, both men and women. But then the Mishnah goes on to say, Kol hanoshim mutaras liraisa, all women may come and see her. Now that seems to imply noshim in, women, yes, they may come, but anoshim loy, men should not come and observe. So it seems to be a contradiction in the Mishnah. First, the Mishnah states, anybody who wants to come and observe, men or women. Then the Mishnah goes on to say, all women may come and see. That seems to imply that only women may come and see, but men should not watch a woman in such a state. Amar Abaye, so Abaye says, Tirgama, I must therefore translate. The first statement which said anybody who wants to come and see, it doesn't mean anybody. Anoshim, it only means women. Means on, not anoshim as in men, but the word the letter aleph means on, like about. Noshim, women. Okay, so Abaye says, when the Mishnah began by saying anybody who wants to come and see can come and see, it doesn't mean anybody, it means only women. So in Abaye's view, men should not be standing around and watching a woman go through this. Only women should be doing so. Okay, this is Abaye's view, which seems reasonable. A woman's going through this embarrassing experience, especially since they're revealing her clothing. So Abaye is saying only women should come and watch this. Because that's the point. The point is women, it should be a deterrent for other women not to behave promiscuously. And therefore it would make sense. Only women come and see. However, the problem is the wording of the Mishnah seems to imply anybody can come and watch. And this is what Rava says. Amalei Rava responds to Abaye, Baha, but the Mishnah states, the katani is what we learned. The Mishnah's phrasing is, anybody who wants to come and see can see. So it's very nice, Abaye, that you're limiting the scope of who can come and watch to only women, making it less embarrassing for her, but that's not the phrasing of the Mishnah. The phrase, it's a very nice idea, but the phrasing of the Mishnah is such that it implies anybody who wants to come and see. Those are the explicit words. So Rava's back to square one. The Mishnah says on the one hand, anybody who wants to come and observe can come and observe, men and women. And then later the Mishnah says, women can come observe. So which one is it? Is it just women or both men and women? So Abaye limited it to just women, but Rava doesn't like that because of the phrasing of the Mishnah. So Rava has to find another resolution to explain this. Ella ma Rava, rather Rava says in answering this question, the first part, the first statement in the Mishnah, which says, anybody who wants to come and observe may come and observe, that indeed means loishna gavri, whether it's a man, the loishna nashi, whether it's a woman. Okay, we keep the Mishnah literally. The Mishnah says anybody who wants to come and see can see, whether man or woman. Whoever wants to observe this may come observe. But then the second statement to the Mishnah, which says that women may come and observe, that means women are actually obliged to come and watch. And there's the two statements in the Mishnah. The first statement in the Mishnah, which says anybody who wants to come and observe may come and observe, that means may come and observe. So men can come, women can come, whoever wants can come. And then the second statement in the Mishnah, which singles out women and says women should come and observe, that actually means an obligation, that they should come and watch. Why? Shenemar, as the verse reads, this is a verse we kept on quoting, then Yuvasu Kalanashim, all women will be warned, as it were, by watching what happens. And they won't behave promiscuously. And therefore, when it comes to whether or not you want to observe anybody, man and woman, anybody who wants to come, this is a public affair, they can come and watch. But women specifically should come and watch. And in that way, learn from their mistakes. Again, the floor is open to try to interpret what this might mean in terms of our relationship.
That's more.
Sorry?
That's much more reasonable. It's much more reasonable.
What's that?
That only women can come.
Yeah, so that's what I was saying. Like Abaye makes sense in terms of like how you want the procedure to go. But the wording of the Mishnah is such that anybody who wants can come. So Rav is kind of stuck, as it were, with interpreting the Mishnah that anybody who wants to may come, even though it's not encouraging all men to come, but men may if they wanted to.
So why did we spend so much time thinking about what it could do to men? If they saw, they can get excited. They can. Because at the
end of the day, the halacha does follow Rava that if a man wants to, he may watch. If a man wants to, he may watch, even if he doesn't have to, but he may. Which is why we spent that whole time thinking about what would happen.
Huh. Okay.
Okay, I'll have a wonderful day.
You too. You too, Robert.
All right, I'll see you.
Robert doesn't hear me.
I think he jumped off.
He's off already. Okay. Take
Have a
care.
good day.
You too.